Hey, Legal Rebels, this is Tom Martin. I'm the founder of LawDroid, and this is my podcast, LawDroid Manifesto, where I interview legal innovators about how they do what they do. In this episode, I interviewed Dennis Kennedy, director of the Center for Law, Technology, and Innovation at Michigan State University, whose visionary work has shaped how lawyers use technology for over 3 decades. Welcome to the LawDroid Manifesto podcast. I'm Tom Martin, your host, and I'm delighted to have Dennis Kennedy on today. He is a living legend, and he, amongst many different accomplishments, he is now the director of the Center for Law, Technology, and Innovation at Michigan State University College of Law. He is also the co-host of the Kennedy Mile Report podcast. He is a frequent speaker, keynote speaker on law and innovation and technology. He's an advisor. He has his own consulting company, the Dennis Kennedy Advisory Company. And he also is a multi-award winner, including the American Legal Technology Award for Lifetime Achievement this past year. So with all of that, I am just thrilled and honored to have Dennis Kennedy on my show. And Dennis, if you could introduce yourself and just tell us a little bit about what you're doing now.
First of all, it's a pleasure and an honor. Thank you for putting together the American Legal Technology Awards. That was great, and a nice capper for some of the things that I've been doing. It's always great to talk with you, Tom, and so I'm looking forward to this conversation. So you've caught me in the middle of spring break, and so I'm teaching classes this semester both at Michigan State University and at the University of Michigan Law School, which generally means I have to keep track of which colors I'm wearing depending on which day and which place I'm at. But I've spent the first few days of spring break working on a big new personal knowledge management AI project for myself that maybe we can touch on. I'm calling it the Knowledge Forge because I love industrial metaphors. So I'm just doing a lot of AI stuff lately. So I teach a class called AI in the Law at Michigan State. And then the class I teach at Michigan is called Legal Technology, Literacy, and Leadership. And those are the primary things I'm up to these days as I work toward what will eventually become my retirement time. So
those times are far off. You got a lot of work to do, and you've been doing a lot of work for many years. And you've been so far ahead of the curve on a lot of this. And I really look up to you in the work that you've accomplished. I remember you being so generous with your time at ABA Tech Show years ago, where I was like, didn't know me from Adam, but I was like, hey, would you like to have some coffee? We could sit down and talk a little bit. And you did. You met with me and gave me some great insights and some things to think about, and I really appreciate that.
Oh, that's great. I love hearing that.
So today, we do want to talk about legal innovation, obviously AI, which is on the tip of everyone's brain every single second. But even more importantly, I'd like to introduce the audience more to your story, like going back. So let's start with your origin story. You were born and grew up in Garrett, Indiana, right?
Right. So Garrett, Indiana, which sometimes during my life would get confused with Gary, Indiana, is the classic small town, Indiana, 5,000 people, outside of Fort Wayne, Indiana, which is the big city near us. Actually coming up on, not this summer, but next summer will be our 50th high school reunion. So that actually, it's interesting that you bring that up, because that is a shaper for me. And most of my family is still in that area. My dad still lives in Garrett. we used to be my grandparents' farm, but now is my dad's farm, and my brother lives up there. That's about 20 miles away, and so we get back fairly often. So that's like a nice touchstone for me, and I in touch with people there. We were a very close class. We're the largest class, I think, in the history of the town, which meant there were like 125 people in the graduating class, maybe a bit more than that. At one point, we were the bicentennial class of the U.S., so 1976. One time when we were freshmen, there was 176 people in the class, and then you gradually, in small towns, the actual graduating class drops down. It was a great class, really unusual group, lots of really smart kids who've gone on to do super interesting things. Like there was one of my classmates was actually the person at FedEx she was an engineer there, and she came up with the idea for barcoding all the packages at FedEx, which is a pretty significant idea, right? And so she got to be like this sort of, she had like a free reign to work with the CEO on ideas and innovation. So it's like a lot of interesting stories. So it was a unique class. Like I said, it's very close. And we all look forward to back together.
Wow. Well, if you don't mind painting a picture of Garrett at the time, is it a farming town as you were describing, or what was it like?
So it was built as a railroading town, so by the Baltimore and Ohio or B&O Railroad in 1875. So actually, this year is the 150th anniversary of Garrett. So the sesquicentennial. So it was traditionally a railroad town. My one of my grandfathers was a conductor on the passenger trains and stuff like that. So it's always been about the same size. So there's farming area around it, but I would say that it was sort of the light industrial area. So people would work. Fort Wayne was just the big city nearby. So you would say it was sort of like auto industry. Now we call it the supply chain for the auto industry. So people would be doing things like working like in places that made brakes or that did chrome plating or, other things like that. It eventually went to the auto industry. So it was traditionally, I would say, pretty much blue collar. And there's, it's Indiana, so there's farms all around, but it's not, I would say that, most people were not farming per se. There's some large farmers, and then people in the summers. I didn't do this actually because my dad had us working on our farm, but from time to time. But some of my friends would during the summer go and work, or in the fall would go and work on some of the large farms nearby to make money.
So tell me a little bit more about that, about family life. Like, so your parents, they ran a farm, or was there something more than that? Or
no.
like, what did?
Yeah. No, so it was my grandparents' farm, and it had been in the family for a long time. I think it goes back like almost not quite 100 years, but so my grandparents were up there. So my mom's parents, and then my dad.
This is the one that was a conductor, right?
Yeah. Okay. So after he retired, then he went up and lived at the farm, and he died relatively young, like in his 70s. And then my grandma lived up there for a long time. And they had, my granddad was a kind of a free spirit in a lot of ways in what I remember of him. In that, so at the farm, he had peacocks. He had all these things up there, and there's still the peacocks that, the family line of peacocks that he brought up there is still up there because my brother, my brother is a master gardener and does all these things, and he likes animals, so he's kind of all the like chickens, peacocks. Sometimes you go up there and he'll like have some sheep or like, beating out cows for the neighbors or
So your brother still takes care of them. He still takes care of the peacocks.
Yeah, so he does that, and then there was a time period where my dad, who worked at a copper rod and wire mill in Fort Wayne, and was like in the machine shop there, would in his spare time when he was so he's working at this place 7 days a week. He was a volunteer fireman, and then for a couple summers, he decided he was going to farm because that's what he was always, one of the things he was interested in. And so we were old enough as teenagers to help with that. And my dad still has stories of like how we weren't always the greatest help, but for time we were, we had a couple fields up there that we grew. I remember that for those summers we were growing popcorn, believe it or not. And then now he has somebody else who just does, so this is sort of the thing in Indiana and I think elsewhere. You have people who do the farming and they basically come in and farm with people, and then there's a sharing on the costs and of what hopefully are profits at the end of it. So now there's somebody who farms up there, and it was great. So the farm is like literally across the road from a state park. And so we always used to go over, walk across the road over to there. And it was called Chaina Lake State Park, which was the idea was of it being a park was it was a perfect example of when the glaciers pulled back, they created these small lakes. And this is like this park sort of memorializes that. So we used to go over there and fish and swim and boat and, on small lakes. So the farm was a big part of our growing up, and like I said, still stay in touch with that and try to figure out the legacy we're going to have with that. But I lived in a town that was about 20 miles away, and that's where I spent most of my time because that's where we lived.
It's really important to remember where you come from, because I think that it has this unique signature in our lives that kind of forms the context of where we develop. And it's interesting that it's a farm, like, metaphorically, that you cultivated this interest in how things work. Even when you're talking about how the glaciers pulled back and stuff, it's this understanding of how the world works. The next step to Wabash University, like you majored in English, right? And what your influence was in taking that step.
So I was always like a math and science person. So, which was sort of, when you're in a small town, that's sort of what people who were academically good were pushed toward. And then I do have to say that when I was a junior in high school, it was the first year that Indiana went to, like, they divided the schools into classes, so like small to large, and our high school in that year won the state championship. So which was great. I was not on the team. I could say that I had surgery, which I did before the start of the semester, or else I would have been on the team. But seriously, if I would have been on the team, I would have been sitting on the bench and would have never got in. But I would have had a ring. And now I have the story like, oh, if I wouldn't have been had the surgery, maybe I would have played. But not.
And this is the football team, right?
Yeah. So this is the football team. So they also just celebrated 50 years since that high school championship, and so that was a big thing, and that was happening at the same time as we had this the centennial, and so I did the sports I did were more like track and cross country. I wasn't really big enough to play football, and as one of my friends said, there was something in us that recognized that our brains were like our value, and we shouldn't risk them playing football with the type of football equipment they had 50 years ago. but I think growing up in a small town has been influential on me in a lot of ways. It allows me to like be able to say when, as part of my negotiating and other style of learning things, to say I'm just a simple country lawyer, and the. But I think that there is an aspect where you say, well, I grew up and I tried a bunch of different things and did different things. So when I decided to go to college, so what I would say and what a lot of my friends say is, we didn't get great advice on going to college because people said you should only consider a few schools and they should only be in Indiana. And so ultimately, when we talk, we say that was really bad advice because we could have done other things. But the fact is that culturally, it would not have been easy, like for somebody in small town Indiana to go, like the East Coast or other schools. Like if you say like I don't even know what a polo shirt is, like that can be a problem. So I went. So my background was in math and science, and I did really really well in that, and was really good at the testing stuff. So
just let me jump in and say, how did that turn around to English though? Because you ended up majoring in English, and I think you graduated magna cum laude. So like no slouch there. Like,
yeah,
how did that change happen?
So what happened was, so two things. So one was when I was in school. No, actually three things. So one, when I was in school, I would say it was like a year before the computer science thing really started to happen, or that would have had an impact on what I did. And probably because there was at a very small school, you didn't have like a lot of class options. So if they would have had like something to where I could go into statistics, it's possible I could have gone that way or other things like that. But so two things hit at the same time. So one was the beginning of the punk rock era, and I was really interested in music. And then I had a mentor who was an English professor who really challenged me. And I was in a class, a required class they called Cultures and Traditions. And he really pushed me on a lot of things. And then he kept saying, like, you should do this. And so I felt that the math I was doing, because we were going back to let's go into the theory of why 2 + 2 = 4, right? And I was like, so if it would have been like applied math, I think I would have possibly stayed with it. But so I was taking philosophy classes, and then Bert Stern, who was my professor, said, you should be an English major. And this would have been the first semester of my junior year. So no English classes at all. He says, I'm going to give you permission to be in the required class for English majors. And I did really well in that. And then I decided I was going to be an English major, and I had to take like all of the English classes I needed for a major in 3 semesters.
Wow.
So I did that. And so obviously I had a knack for it and skills, and it was like a strong interest of mine. And so that did it. It felt more relevant. Just where my friends were. That's where I could really see, it was just such a better fit for me. But I didn't know anything, right, about, so the job market then, so 1980, the job market, just totally dropped out on everything, but especially on, humanities types of majors. So people told me, with your mix of math and English and your ability to write, you should go to law school.
You said that with a transition to English, that it was a better fit for you. And I just want to go into like a little more about that. Why was it a better fit?
Well, I ultimately, I would say it was gave me a larger palette to work with. So I sort of felt the math thing was like narrowing. And then I was like, oh, here are these ideas, and here's these ways to combine them. And this is moving, philosophy, English, movies, all the music, all these things have some common themes that are speaking to me. And it's not so narrow. And then people are saying, well, if you're a math major, you can do like actuarial work or, these kinds of things. I'm going, yeah, I don't really see that, like how that's going to work for me. So was that sort of, you know, the sense that it was broad, it was like, I don't know a better way to say it than it sort of spoke to me. That's where some of my friends were. It's like, so everything was relating. Like, oh, we saw Springsteen for the first time. We did like all this stuff together. It just made a lot of sense. Although it kind of came to a screeching halt, like at the end of my senior year, because I had to make decisions that ended up with me going to law school.
Right. And just before we move on to that, you piqued my interest about punk rock. So what was your take on that? Did you get involved in a band, or like what is just like an interest in the subculture? Like what was that?
So it was interest in I would say it's interest in the subculture. We kind of have this running joke. A friend of mine was a DJ at the college radio station, and we like to say that we had the first punk rock radio show in Indiana, right? Big claim, right? And and so he had like the crappiest cassette tape of like all these songs, like from the English punk movement, right?
Yeah.
And so we started the show by playing so this is back in the days of vinyl, right, on record stations. So we started out by playing it was probably Stairway to Heaven. I know it was like a Led Zeppelin song, and we like scratched the needle across it. I know we did the Sex Pistols' God Save the Queen, right? And we were just like jumping up and down, the two of us, and saying, this is so awesome. And then we got this call, and we're going like, oh, somebody's calling in. And they said, do you know that you have dead air? And play some more Led Zeppelin. And so what had happened was my friend, who was the DJ, had forgot to hit the button to switch over to the tape, So,
oh, man.
So we did that. And so that was the thing. And, it was just like, you're 20 years old, and it's weird because we talk about it now because it was like, oh, these bands and these people really spoke to us and we felt they were like us. But then if you read their history, like drug use, the New York stuff, like all these things, they were not like us at all, in a way, but the music was, right. So it was, not in a band, but sort of like kind of to the extent in Indiana, in a small, a small college, you can be like have a punk culture. That was part of the thing.
That's really cool. Thank you for sharing that, Dennis. I just as a side note, like, I was into the punk / goth subculture when I was coming up, and I always found that it reflected, but also was like reflective of where I was at as kind of like an outsider culture, right? Looking from the inside in. And there's, a whole slew of reasons for that. Like just, everyone feels like that to a certain extent when they're a teenager. But it's an interesting perspective.
Yeah, I would say so. I'm working with a retirement coach now, and one of the things we've been talking about is, and this I think relates back to that, is we talk about my impatience with the status quo, or frustration, but impatience is probably a good word for it. So there was that, and then also say, like, if you look at like Clash and other things, there was a sort of community sense to what was happening, and sort of breaking down the barriers between the sort of the sort of big, wealthy, bands that were filling stadiums, and then the punk bands that were sort of, interacting with their audience. So I think some of those things picked up as well.
Yeah, for sure. And I like that part of our community in this legal tech thing that we have. It definitely feels like that. Very like a positive reinforcement of what we're all trying to do.
Yeah, if we could all, I sometimes felt like the early law bloggers, if we would have had, if we knew how to play guitars and stuff, we would have like had a band. But
that would be cool to hear. So okay, so let's go forward to Georgetown. So you go to Georgetown. It feels like a good combination of these different skills that you put together. Which, by the way, I think is kind of cool that you've had tastes of like different areas. Generalism, I think, is actually very in style right now. But so you go to Georgetown, and like, what's the vision there?
Well, I think the vision was that I felt that I'd always been in Indiana and I wanted to try something that was, sort of like a bigger city, kind of prove that I could do it.
Mm.
And I got accepted like right away, and I went out there and I liked it, and I said, this would be cool. I think I can, I can try this, and if I don't like this, then maybe I could go do like graduate school in English or do something else, right? But probably, and my mom was really excited, especially about me deciding to go to law school. So it was like, okay, I'll try this, and it was, it was a tough transition, and to kind of learn the approach. But I met great people, had great classes, did some cool things. I always, I start out all my talks about AI saying, back in 1982, I was at Georgetown Law School and I took one of the first computers in the law seminars in the US. And we spent 2 classes talking about AI, and we thought that it was the next thing. And and I said, it's interesting because all the legal issues are the same as they were 40 some years ago. Like the technology in the examples are different, and I use it to say, like, we thought this was, I could see this was going to be a big thing. And if you look back at the history of AI, you'll see in the early 80s, there was a sense, it was like a big upturn on AI, and it was followed by like a really long AI winter after that.
Yeah.
And it was just, the technology just, wasn't there in terms of what was happening. But I actually explored, could I go into AI at the time, but just in a sort of, dilettante way, not as but I was thought like, oh, it'd be something I could turn into a hobby at some point.
Well, and in prepping to interview you, like one of the things that I saw that after law school, I think you had one law job, but then the second one just really struck me because I think it was 98 and you were a director of legal innovation at a company called NetTech, right?
Yep.
What that that's really early on. Like that's really forward thinking. What was going on there?
So what had happened was I had done, to kind of fast, the quick view of my career, that I had ended up doing, and I really enjoyed doing this. Worked at a firm in St. Louis where we did very high end estate and tax planning, and I really liked it. It was very creative work, really fun. Got me involved in computers. And then sort of in the, the early 90s, and then especially in, I think it was like August of 1995, I was like, oh my God, the internet is the second coming of the printing press. This could be the most important thing in my lifetime. I have the opportunity to be part of that. Why am I not doing that? And so there was actually, so here's the origin story. So I decided I was going to take a day off of work and go see the Windows 95 rollout, because it was, it was sort of simulcast, in different parts of the country and around the world. And Bill Gates was talking about Windows 95, but it was the part he was talking about the internet. And actually, it's sort of ironic because he's talking about the potential integration of the browser into the operating system, which then got Microsoft in trouble. But I totally understood it. And I was driving back home and I couldn't stop thinking about it. And I actually missed my turnoff going back home. And then that weekend I said, I missed the whole damn internet. I just missed it all. It's gone. And I can't be part of it. So over the weekend, I put up a web page. And then that web page led to most of the rest of my career in a lot of ways. So I said, I need to be part of this. And I spent time thinking through that. And I saw the changes that were happening in the legal profession. in the area that I was in, which actually echo a lot of things that are still happening. And I said, I have the chance to change my career so it's closer to the internet ultimately.
Yeah.
So I gave up a partnership in a law firm, and I was going to do, sort of writing, consulting, other things around technology and innovation in law. And there was a friend of mine who had this company called NetTech, and you'll love this story, that we decided that we would kind of work together. I would be part of that, and that we were going to ride the Y2K thing. Like in law firms, and that was going to be like our thing, and that would get us all established in this. Well, we didn't appreciate that law firms just absolutely didn't care. Like they didn't care about Y2K, right? And they
haven't heard that before.
so it ended up. So long story short, it was fun for a while, didn't work, and then I had the chance to go back and actually learn to do what I'll call information technology law at one of the bigger firms in St. Louis. And so I did that for a bit. And then there's also a transition story there, which is always a lesson in when you're at a place that you like and there's a merger that sometimes becomes a place that it might not fit as well as it once did. It's that way.
Yeah, no, I feel for you on that. Like I've had that experience myself. Sometimes change in management, and then they have different priorities, things like that. So the next one I want to talk to you about is how did that come about, type of thing. And it seems to me like one where I'm sure there are a lot of great lessons learned that you could share. But you have a position as vice president of digital payments at MasterCard. How did that come about? What did you do there, and what did you take away from that?
Yeah, so that was what I call my in-house counsel career. And so I was way to understand the MasterCard thing for me is I was in St. Louis at the time. And the connection to MasterCard is MasterCard's main data center and operations center is outside of St. Louis. So that's the frame here. So I was doing some work with them, and it got to be, you could basically call it like a secondment over time, but you could also say I had like my own firm that by far the biggest client was MasterCard, and I was essentially working full time for them. And so they reached a point where I had kind of, maxed out time we could have that arrangement. And so they brought me in-house as an in-house counsel, and I was like, essentially, you can think of it as technology counsel in connection with the data center. So software, hardware, services, open source, a lot of things that people associate with me in law. Then toward the end, I had the chance to work with a really cool company that we bought and moved to this group that was called Emerging Payments in Labs, which then became Digital Payments in Labs. And that was sort of, you can think of it as like the newest technologies, the innovation group, the R&D group, other things that we were doing. So everything that's sort of forward facing was part of this. And I would also describe it as the place where MasterCard was trying to focus on moving from a financial institution to a fintech company. And so, whereas what I was doing before, I would call like infrastructure and on the, what we brought in and development, that group was more consumer or customer facing. And there's a lot of complexity there. It's the nature of MasterCard's business. So, blockchain, AI, APIs, all this stuff was part of the things I did. I also got to work with our, mobile wallet, other things like that you see now, that we kind of take for granted. Like, it's still interesting to me that, like when I go to a place and pay for something and tap, like how long it's taken for that actually come into play, compared to, when we first started working on that. So it's very global. I also got to do a lot of the innovation things. So we had a financial inclusion lab in Africa that was doing really cool things. And so I got to do that, and that was, super creative, you know, really fun, great people. Can't say enough good things about most of that. But as a friend of mine once told me, who was a career coach, said, the thing about you is that you can last about 10 years in one thing, and then it's like you have to change. And
Yeah.
she also said to me, like, and I cannot believe that you were able to survive in a corporate culture for as long. She said I would have never that long a time. So to go back to the math thing, I reached a point where the math worked out. So it was like the number of years plus my age qualified for early retirement. And I said,
Okay.
like, instead of having this job and doing a bunch of stuff on the side, I'll just retire and do the side stuff. So that was the plan. And as I'm sure you will ask, that's not exactly how it worked out.
Yeah. So about the 10 years, it was about 9 years that you were at MasterCard, right?
And then, and a couple years before that, where I was not technically an employee.
Yeah. And I mean, there's so much to unpack there. We can't go into all of it, but like, the thing that stands out to me is that you had the exposure to all of that, from blockchain to, using automation and technology for payments and tapping and a lot. Like, you had exposure to all of that in a very practical, like on the ground way. It wasn't, this would be cool, and here's an abstract concept I have of how things could be. You were dealing with the day in, day out, of how to make that actually operational.
Yeah, it's like you say, what are the legal issues if we have like a mirror in a pop-up clothes shop that where people can try on clothes and order them and pick them up, and like what are the legal issues around that? What like, it's smart refrigerator concept, and so as an aside, this led me from the what we described. We were moving from, forget what it was first, but then we were going to be then we were becoming product lawyers, product counsel, which was, I think, an innovation of Michael Grazio, who was the head of the law department group I was with, and just something that I conceived of and spoke about, and I still talk about from time to time, the notion of a platform lawyer or a ecosystem lawyer. So what happens when I have this smart refrigerator? It becomes really hard to determine what the product is and who's involved in it. And it's not if I look at it as a series of one-on-one transactional deals, can that even make sense? And how do we have to figure out how that all works together? And if I say, I go to the refrigerator and I have to click through 15 different terms of use and privacy policies, then as a consumer, I never use that, right? So, like, right. What do we do along those lines? So it's really interesting in terms of how law was changing. Also going through the period where we were moving from on-premises software licensing to cloud agreements. And in one case, that happened like dramatically and completely in a period of months. So that actually the type of legal work agreements, everything changed. And that was all interesting. Although I will tell you that the business people I worked with and the tech people would always like walk by my desk and say, like, I don't understand why you're doing this stuff. You should be part of the business. You should be doing like the cool stuff. And that was fun too, because the last group I was with, at their company meetings, they would actually say to me, like, we need to hear from Dennis, and we don't want to hear from Dennis as a lawyer, but we want to get your opinions about what it is that we're doing. And that was really cool.
Yeah. Put your business hat on. So yeah, I'm really interested to know what your approach was when you got to basically focus on the side stuff, which to me, like, viewing it from my life, like, that's all the cool stuff, the fun stuff, and you had the opportunity and you have put that front and center. So how did that play out?
So it worked out really well. In that I was like, okay, so I want to do the writing, I want to do speaking, podcasts, other things that would come up, potentially advisory boards, other things like that, and kind of put that together in a sort of, not full-time work kind of way. And so I chased a number of things down. I started some things. Like I'm really good at starting things and then learning from things that don't work out so well necessarily. My wife always says, and other people tell me, like, you're kind of ahead of your time in this stuff, and that people don't really see what it is that you're offering. And then I will come up with something that seems like a better idea. So I was teaching it. So I started teaching at as an adjunct at Michigan State because somebody I knew there, Ken Grady, was not able to teach anymore, and he asked me if I would do it, and he recommended me. So I was teaching this class. One was called Entrepreneurial Lawyering, and another one called Delivering Legal Services, which was about sort of the Toyota method and process improvement and stuff like that. And so I can't leave well enough alone. So I kind of reconfigured those classes and really enjoyed that. And looked at some of the things I was starting on my own, kind of incorporate into those things. And then I decided that it was really more about innovation was my interest rather than pure tech. That especially legal tech. And you'll notice in Tom Miles and I podcasts is that we kind of keep the focus on pure legal tech. It's a little bit difficult these days. And so we've kind of gone to much broader approach. And I see technology as just one piece of innovation. And there are, so it opened up this whole area learned. So I was trying a bunch of different things, doing some writing, stuff like that. And then the teaching thing, I talked with one of the deans at Michigan Law School, and I thought we were just having coffee, and then it ended up that he was asking me to more or less create a class that I could do at Michigan Law School, which is the thing called Legal Technology, Literacy, and Leadership. Because I said, I could teach a class that tells, sort of shows students how to do what I did. And sort of like, what is the technology you need to know? What do clients expect? And how can you use innovation and technology to grow your career? So that's what that class is about. And then so I've had the opportunity to do that. And I mean, this is sort of the thing, about my career is I try different things and I actually do pretty well at them. And so people liked my teaching, and then I did more of it. And then the opportunity came to be the interim director of the Center for Law, Technology, and Innovation at Michigan State when somebody left, my predecessor left. And then I became what I called it, the permanent director, which I'm still arguing, and I tell people this, that the only way it's not going to be just 2 more years is somebody's going to have to convince my wife and daughter, and I don't think they can do that because they would like this. My daughter especially would like her dad slow down, and so more teaching and that sort of thing. And then I said one day, like when I became the permanent director, I said, you know what? Unfortunately, I have to say I unretired. I mean, like, can't really argue that I'm retired if I have like a full-time job. So that's sort of the transition. And then surprisingly, then the whole ChatGPT thing happened, and I kind of 40 years later, I find myself in the AI world.
So let's talk a little bit about that. I mean, there's been so much change in so little time. The past 3 years have been this, it's almost like getting sucked into an event horizon. It just feels like there's this time dilation where decades have passed in years. What do you think about this, and where do you think it's going?
one of the things I always say about AI right now, especially legal AI, is like so many experts out there. And I just feel like I'm just trying to learn, like I know that, right? I know a lot about this stuff and I'm trying a lot of things, but I'm like, I need to experiment. I need to see what this is good at, what it's not good at. There are some walls that we're going to hit. But, it's sort of, I tell my students that I always like to ask this question of compared to what, right? So is what we can do with AI, does it advance things or not? Or, so it's like, is the perfect the enemy of the good here, right? So if I can do something using AI, so I'm terrible at note taking, right? So I read a bunch of books, I have no notes from them, but I can use AI to summarize those books and store those. And I say, and people go like, well, how accurate are the summaries? Blah, 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 all this stuff. Yeah. And I go like, look, my note, I have 0 notes from my book. So the value of my notes on these books is 0%. So if you get me to 1%, even 2%, 20%, I think the summaries are probably like 80% useful, maybe more. That's really helpful. Because I'm comparing it to something. And then they would say, but you can't use it for, like writing this research paper and stuff. And I go, I'm not doing that. Right. So like, I'm not going to Mars either. Right. Like I'm not climbing Mount Everest, like I don't understand the comparison. So I think we're at the stage where there's, it's the biggest, like it's the tallest and sharpest Gartner hype cycle ever. Right. I mean, it's like go clear off the top of the page. So I think we're still trying to figure out what it does, and it's a really moving target. And there's a lot, as you say, there's a lot of things happening. I keep telling people that I've seen so much change in the last 2.5 months that in AI, it's staggering. And if you're having a conversation about what AI was like last summer, it's like you're not even describing what's going on in the world right now, with the tools. So I like to push to say, where does this work? Where doesn't work? Can I do a bunch of experiments? Can I learn from it? So my friend Dan Lina once said to me when talking about the Toyota method he said, it's kind of the scientific method, just the scientific method. And I was like, that's really interesting. And I'm like, yeah, this is what we're doing. We have this hypothesis and we test it out. And if it works, that's great. If it doesn't work, then we learn something from it and we try something else. And so those are the things that I look at AI. But I'm also saying we have to step back and ask really serious questions. And so one of the things I like to say is that AI, for whatever reason, pushes us to the most fundamental issues and questions really quick. So we say, well, we couldn't have AI be a judge, right? And then we start to say, well, what is it that's magic about biased human judges? What happens? What is it? Why wouldn't we want to have consistency? Like if we're not, and I show this thing to my classes all the time. I say, like, if the AI is 87% accurate, right, in facial recognition, we would go, if you're going to put me in jail with 87%, are you going to arrest me and haul me in? Right? It's unacceptable, right? Except if you tell me that human eyewitness testimony is somewhat less. Then that raises a serious question, and we need to think that through, because we could say that's okay. We know that AI is more accurate, but we prefer a human system, right? And we can have that conversation and make that decision. So I see AI as pushing us on a lot of those things that we don't really want to face up to. So there's implications in education, in a lot of other things we do. The whole court system itself. The access to justice space, like all these things. And that's just the law side. And as lawyers, we're kind of slow playing this or no playing it. And at the same time, the adoption of AI in other areas is immense and it's fast. And so I like to say, who are the lawyers who are going to represent people using AI, the businesses using AI? If we are saying we're hands off, we're not going to learn it, we're going to go back in law school to handwritten exams and blue books. We're not going to, we're not going to allow people to use AI. So where do we get the lawyers that help these people who are doing this stuff right now? And then as I challenge my students this semester, I say, we need to be able to explain as lawyers. And I say, I think we can do this, but it's going to take more and more work. Is what value do we bring that somebody should hire us instead of using an AI? And what will become tricky is that lawyers I know, because we don't want to pay legal fees either, like we're using AIs to get answers ourselves. So, so it's like, how do we connect those dots? And so that's where I'm at. I have some concerns, right, about that the big tech companies are making all the decisions. That that we're in the world's largest beta test, unsupervised beta test of a technology ever, where the focus is turning to national security. This is, a shout out to the Canadians, right? When U.S. focuses on national security, Canadians get nervous, right? They can't say Patriot Act to somebody from Canada without them breaking out in hives. So it's like, so what's going to happen with the directions that we're going? And is anybody going to make a decision about that other than either big tech companies or more likely people who are, coders who have to make a decision to say, is this a yes or is this a no, or I do something, and they have to make what seems like a small decision that has lots of unintended consequences. And then to kind of sum all this up, what I've been saying lately is law, and I have to remember who to cite this to, which I don't have in front of me, but law is a complex system that is trying to regulate a complex system of complex systems. And almost by definition, like what we do is going to have unintended consequences. And so we need to study that. If you're asking me, like the things that I want to learn more about over time, I said complex systems is definitely one of them. Which is great living in Ann Arbor, home of University of Michigan is like, there's like world-class complex systems people here, and they do like little presentations and stuff from time to time. So there are ways to learn things. But I think that all of those things are coming together. So it's almost not as much about the technology as like, what are the implications of AI in a legal system that's already struggling, put it mildly.
Wow. Well, so many profound questions that you raised there, Dennis. And I hope that the audience really maybe rewinds this and listens to it again, because just some high point takeaways that I get from what you said is, AI is imploring us to engage with, like, definitionally, like almost like Socrates, what is love, right?
Right.
What is
trust?
Yeah.
Like, what do we mean by trust?
Yeah. What are all these things, and causing us to face that down as to how we're conceiving that. Then also accountability, because as you pointed out, there is a difference qualitatively between the judgments that humans make and our ability to live with them versus the judgments that a machine makes, even though their correctness might be a higher percentage than us. There's just something different about how that sits with us. Then also, like, you bring up the point about value, the value of the service being provided, and like, whose value, from what perspective? Is it the value to the consumer? Is it to the value to the labor or knowledge worker that's creating that value? And how do we like reassess that in an AI first world? And control, right, is the last one. Is just how much control do we cede? Do we want to do that? Do we have a choice of whether or not we do that? And is that in the hands of a few, like you said?
Right. Like, who regulates the regulators? I mean, these are all like the basic questions that we have the tools to deal with. Without revealing, I won't give any context, but I talked to somebody who was a professor. I'm definitely not saying at one of the schools I teach at, but who's a legal history, taught legal history. And he said, this AI, I'm glad I don't have to deal with it. And I said, I'm actually really interested in your perspective because I want to know, like, how in history, what happened with the legal system when we had the printing press? What happened when there was the introduction of big technologies? What are these things? And he said, oh, I hadn't really thought about that. Then he said, but the way I look at it is I have tenure, so I don't have to worry about any of this. Like I can't lose my job. And my thought was like, I would hate to be a student in your class, right? And I tell students this, and they go like, I wouldn't want to be in that class, right? And because they're sharp, they see what's going on, and they see the impact of that. So I think there is that sort of, what do we do if we're going forward? And as a profession, we say, oh, we'll let other people decide what's going to happen. And I like to say, from being in the corporate world, they see lawyers as the friction, right? And they look to eliminate lawyers from the equation. And if we're just stepping back and saying, like, go right ahead, but it's like risky, or you shouldn't, like, my favorite thing is like, you shouldn't use AI right now. Like, well, like, yeah, that doesn't work, right? Like, how is it going to work? Like, how are we going to keep, stay in business, those kinds of things? How do we think through these? And as go back to what you started with, is that it's happening so fast, right? You really do feel that the pace of change is faster than anything that we've seen. It actually feels even faster than like the beginning of COVID, when we had to go remote so quick. Like, AI feels like it's faster even than that.
Yeah. Well, I completely agree with you. Quote Shakespeare, he talked about, first thing you do is get rid of all the lawyers, but the context of that was not what a lot of people think. It was that, if you want to take control of people and society, then you want to get rid of lawyers, because they're the ones that underpin a principled democracy. And I think we're seeing some of that right now. And so very necessary. But I think one thing that we as lawyers need to do a better job of is communicating that value to people.
Right. Yeah. So like I said, we're the friction, right? Or we say, you can't do this. We're not going to participate in this. Because I tell my students, like, if you're interested in policy, right? Public policy, this is the time to be a lawyer. Like, my students are really good in AI. I said, like, there's somebody you want to work with, especially in the policy area. They need somebody who has your perspective and your skill set. Because if you just say, like, we don't know anything, right? So, whatever, or we'll take a year or 2 years to decide, it gets, it's past us. And I mean, I hesitate on that a bit, right? Because, who knows, right? As they say, prediction is really hard, especially about the future, So I don't, it's hard to, part of my thing is I can't predict, but I can look at scenarios, I can look at likelihoods, I can do those sorts of things. So how do we do that? And my concern is, this is the legal profession. We just say, we're not going to play. We'll let a few people decide, and then we'll sort it out. And then, as litigators like to say, we'll sue people, and then 5 years from now, we'll get a trial court decision, and 4 years after that, we'll get an appellate decision, and then we'll have clarity. And I'm like, yeah, and the technology won't be around us. At the same time, it does feel, as I say, and I don't know whether I'm right about this, because there have been other things, but it does feel that there's the same energy and excitement and things happening as what happened at the beginning of the internet. And I treat that seriously. And I have told people that at the beginning of the internet, I never felt that I would be able to be part of something that was like the invention of the printing press in my lifetime. And with this round of AI, I'm not sure it's going to happen, but it feels like I have the chance to do that twice, you know, and to think about this, and I know, Tom, you think about these things as well, but sort of say like, well, what happens when AI becomes a platform? Is it going to be like the internet? What is the blog of the AI platform? What is the podcasting of the AI platform? Like how can we use this so it's just not like some weird research tool, like some answer machine, but it becomes the platform thing, as they used to say in the old days, a computing mechanism becomes a connection mechanism. And does AI fit that pattern, or is it something else? So when I say I'm looking forward in some ways to retiring, it's not because I'm not going to be thinking about these things. I just want to spend more of my time on some of those things. So
That sounds like a great place to be, and I wish you well on that, because I know in the future I'd love to be able to have that time to spend that way. But in the time that we have left, there's two questions I want to ask you. I ask all the guests.
okay.
So one of them is kind of like to help out people that are watching, because from everything that you've said, obviously, like a lot of type A guests that I talk to, like you have so much going on, you're balancing so much and juggling these things. How do you do that? Like, how do you get through the day with all of those different priorities?
So I used to think that like I had this skill set, and the one that Whitney Johnson says, that who wrote this great book called Disrupt Yourself, which I'll recommend, says that our superpowers are usually something that we don't appreciate. We think everybody can do that. And then I sort of realized that one of my superpowers is this ability to manage time and projects. And to say like, if I'm going to do these things, here's how I can do that. And I'm turning over some of that stuff to AI, and then I'm also and also work with coaches over time, career coaches and otherwise. So usually you see where I made a major career change, I was using coaches at the time, doing the same thing with retirement. And so it comes down to saying like, okay, I need to more formally set priorities. I need to be able to say no more. I need to say, to set boundaries. And I need to say like, does this fit, what I say the priorities are? And can I, or is this just, and this is my problem, or is this just so cool, I just have to do it, right? And then if I do that, then the thing I'm now working toward is to say, okay, if something comes in, something has to go out, right? And then also I think the other thing you can do where you can get in over your head is you start to say, some of these things aren't work for me, and they really are. So like one of my favorite things to do is my podcast with Tom Mile. And I don't I often downplay the work on that because it's just so much fun, right? And or you do other things. So like I'm writing and this is fun and that sort of thing. And then you realize, oh, this is taking up a lot of time. Great, love talking to students, but I'm tired. And then I've also sort of focused on energy as being more important than time. You can manage time pretty well, but you can't manage energy so well, especially as you get older. And to say, okay, so where can I put my energy that's the right place? And then having, a wife and daughter, who are like, we don't want you working so hard. Do you really need doing this stuff? It is helpful. And then trying to resist saying like, oh, I can help this person. I can do that. I can, do those things to say like, okay, what makes sense? And, what's draining, try to avoid more things that are draining. So it takes a lot of work. I spend a lot of time on that. And like I said, I've used the coaching thing very successfully, and I always recommend that to people. And, my current coach, has been so incredibly helpful. And it'd be hard to know what to do without her, at this point. And so that's what I would think about. And then also to say, like, I want to focus on the stuff that I'm most interested in that are strengths of mine. Because a lot of times we're taught, like, you need to get good at the stuff you're not good at, and so you spend a lot of time on that and you hate it, right? And you're saying, I got to get good at that. But
Yeah.
I'm trying to do more like, hey, here's the stuff I'm good at. Here's the stuff I'm not good at. Like, can I delegate this stuff that I hate doing? Can I just stop doing it? Those kinds of things. And I think that's hard when you're starting out because you just have to feel like just everything. And then to be willing to say, like, oh, I can try this. And again, this is a scientific method. Go like, oh, what would happen if I do this? Just treat it as an experiment. Like I tell my students, your final paper is really good. I think it's publishable. Like, put it out, like, here's somebody to contact to about this. And a lot of them are super hesitant about that. And I'm like, it's easy for me to say, being older, that, like, what's the worst? Somebody says no, or, but maybe they say, like, I can't do this, but if you did a shorter version of this, or you might send it to so-and-so, or that kind of thing. I also tell my students that the sort of hidden thing out there these days is that, whether it's bar associations or other groups, they're really aging, right? They're desperate for young people. And they, on a lot of these tech topics, especially, they don't have people who can speak on this stuff. So if you're like, even if you're a law student, like, and you want to talk on AI and you want to join some group and do that there's time from putting together events that you say, like, okay, well, I don't know about this person. I don't know what their skills are exactly, but we can put them on a panel with somebody that we know is good and bring them along. And I tell my students, this is a tremendous opportunity for you. Like, I've been on panels with people where I say, like, is this person fantastic? Are they super skilled? I'm like, no, they're a beginner, but the potential is so great. Like, let's help them do this. So I think a lot of those things, so that experimental approach and being willing to try things, and then to say, like, failure is something that doesn't work, just means you got to go back to the hypothesis, readjust it, and decide whether you want to do the next experiment or not.
Well, I love that. And I think those are great words of wisdom, and people should put less pressure on themselves about stuff like that. And also, I just want to thank you for spending some of your time and energy with me today. You had a choice of many things that you could be doing. So I appreciate that. The one last question that I want to ask you before we go is, again, I ask everyone this, but, like, doing all this stuff, at the end of the day, like, what makes it worthwhile for you? Like, what gives you that sense of satisfaction?
I think there's, I look at this and, like I said, I'm working with this coach, and so you try to sort some of these things out, and you say, well, is it I want to create a legacy? Is it this? Is it that? I sort of think it's like this, you do have this impact thing, like, where it's great to have somebody come up to you and say, like, I'm a fan of your work. I've been, like, listening to your podcast. I've been reading your stuff, and it changed my career. And I'm really thankful, because you feel like, oh, I have some impact, and there are, whether it be students, early bloggers, others, where I would say, like, oh, as I see them succeed, my research assistants and other group, I see them succeed. That's really enjoyable to me. And I go back to, my early mentors, and I say, I learned so much from them, and there is this enjoyment that comes from that. And I think that becomes, part of the motivation. And like, when you dig all the way down, right, sometimes you're going, like, why, like, I did this, like, years ago, and now somebody is, like, saying the same thing, and and they're getting all this credit, and it's not new, and you go, like, I don't care about that. It's like, the people are now getting this idea, right? It's like, my wife has been talking about, like, being more comfortable with that. I'm often feel like I'm ahead of the curve, and that's okay. Like, I don't have to say like, oh, I was the first to do this, I was the first to that. It's like, no, like, I'm just happy that people are now coming around to this. And I think we say that sort of frustration, the impatience with the status quo. I think that's where I'm at with the AI and law, because I say, like, this is a big deal. It could go haywire. Don't get me wrong, but this is a big deal. And I don't know why we say we just have to keep things exactly the same, because every red flag is out there saying this is not the same. We need to pay attention to this. And I see people are really comfortable saying, like, we just need to go do the same thing the same way, get people back in the office, associates only, not partners, of course. And that I want people in the office. So, like, if I'm here and I need to grab somebody in the hall, I can do that, because I can't be bothered to learn how to use Zoom or to reach out, to somebody and ask them through, some technology that would work really well. I realize now that, Bill Hobson, who I worked with, was probably my main law mentor. He had moved to St. Louis, and he had started out at White and Case in New York. And he had worked with somebody who was like, a partner at White Case, who had worked for somebody else at White and Case. And one of the things we talk about is how some of the things that they did, like, stayed with him his whole career. And I can see that as I look around my desk and I say, I swore that my desk would never look like Bill Hobson's desk, and I wouldn't do these things that Bill did. But here I am, right? And and I realized that they go back like generations, and it's those kind of connections. And perhaps you appreciate that more from a small town background, with, my dad getting older and stuff like that. And my daughter, especially, really interested in family history. But I think there you say, like, oh, there are these things that kind of you set in place and they ripple out and they have consequence. And I think that is a great thing. Especially if they turn out in a good way, right?
Yeah. For sure. That helps. Well, thank you so much, Dennis. I really appreciate you being on my show, spending time with me and talking to me about all these heady things.
Okay. Yeah, great. And yeah, I'm not always like going deep on things. There's a lot of shallow things I like to experiment with too. So,
well, I'm a philosophy major at heart, so like I love talking about that stuff.
So you'll appreciate this. That one of my AI projects is like, I wonder if I could have the AI like summarize those absolutely unreadable translations of Heidegger and Husserl and like put them in language that you could actually understand. That would be a test.
Yeah, I could think of a ton of students that would thank you for that. Yeah, phenomenology in plain language. That's great. Well, for everyone who's listening and watching, how can they keep in touch with you?
Well, I'm always sort of the hub, as Tom Mile likes to say. The hub of my stuff all comes through DennisKennedy.com, but sort of LinkedIn, the Kennedy Mile Report podcast. I'm doing this new thing called Legal AI Live. This on LinkedIn, the second Fridays of each month with Matt Kurbis, and then the stuff I'm doing at the center at Michigan State. We're doing some really cool things there. So there's a number of different things, and then you get the some stuff on Legal Tech Hub, but usually most stuff kind of the center point is still the website, which has been around for 30 years. So, and I get to say, this is one thing that impresses people. It still surprised me. I say, like I was one of the first lawyers with a website in 1995. There's about like 20 of them, And there's some people like Greg Siskin who might have like predated it a little bit, and maybe like one or two others kind of snuck into 1994. But that's the one thing that I say where people are like super impressed. Wow. So
that is pretty impressive.
And at the time I said, I missed the whole damn internet. I missed it. So
no, there's still plenty of time. Like there is with AI. It's feels early, but there's a lifetime and generations after. Dennis, thank you so much for spending time with me. Your story of your career and your origin story, a lot of courageous choices there. And so, thank you. Thank you for being on the show.
Okay, great. It was fun.
And to all of you, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Thank you so much for watching the latest episode of the LawDroid Manifesto podcast. To keep in the loop about upcoming episodes, please subscribe to LawDroid Manifesto and you'll get notified. Thanks for watching. See you next time.